Everything that I know about music, I learned from my dad. And when I was in fourth grade, that's when we as students were allowed to pick an instrument to take lessons in and join the school band. And I chose the trombone for two reasons. The first one was that my fourth grade crush, Jessica, told me that she was going to play the saxophone. And I knew that the saxophone players and the trombone players took lessons together. And the reason I didn't just also play the saxophone was that the buttons scared me. The second reason I chose to play the trombone was that my dad was a phenomenal trombone player. He played for many years in the Marine Corps band, and he traveled around the country playing with them. He was based in New Orleans, and he played in a lot of clubs there, and he even played in the Super Bowl a few times. So I thought by choosing the trombone, he can certainly give me a lot of good pointers. Now, there were only two trombone players in the whole school. It was me and a fifth grader named Gina. And I worked really hard for weeks at this instrument, and I just couldn't get it. I was terrible. And you know, trombone, it's a really hard instrument to play when you're a kid because you have these little fourth grade arms and you can't reach far enough to hit a C note. But the only consolation was that Gina was also terrible. So as long as she was setting the bar low, I felt like I was doing okay. Until 2 weeks before our first concert, Gina decides to quit, now leaving me as the only trombone player in the whole school, and I'm awful at it. So my band teacher, Miss Pettigrew, is understandably very concerned. And then a week before our first concert, there's a parent-teacher conference, and my dad comes in, and he meets Miss Pettigrew for the first time. And he mentions to her that, he played the trombone in the Marine Corps band, and he traveled around the country doing it. And she goes, "Wait, would you like to play with the fourth graders in our winter concert?" And he's like, I don't know. This is their thing. I don't want to take anything away from it. And she's like, "Please, will you play with the fourth graders?" So he reluctantly accepts. And when he comes back and he tells me about it, he actually seems excited about it. And I am mortified. Because I'm a kid, I don't want to be sitting in the front row with Jessica on my left and an adult man on my right. And I just know that I'm going to be awful and he's going to be great and I'm going to be so embarrassed by it. But the concert comes around and we start playing the first song, and immediately my dad and I are competing to see who can play the quietest. I'm playing quietly because I don't want people to hear the noises coming out of my trombone. My dad is playing quietly because he doesn't want to upstage a bunch of 9-year-olds. We're both playing so quietly that Miss Pettigrew, while conducting, is looking at us and waving at us to get louder. So we go through the first song, the second song goes a little bit better, and the third song we play was "What a Wonderful World" by Louis Armstrong. And you guys know it, it's so slow and soft, and it's such a beautiful song, and it's not as hard to play on the trombone for a kid. And this time, I decided to just relax a little bit, and as we're playing, I start listening to my dad play next to me, and he's hitting every note perfectly, and it's so smooth and beautiful. And in that moment, all of the nervousness that I had about this just melted away. And I started to really appreciate that not only was my dad willing to play with his son, he was excited to play music with his son. And that's something that was so special to me in that moment. And he ended up playing in every concert we did for the next 5 years. Every year, for 5 years, we had a total of 0 new trombone players. I was always the only one, and so we just kept inviting him back. And every time it was special. I was never nervous about it. I was always excited about it. I had a blast every time getting to play with my dad. So much so that when I got to high school and there were some upperclassmen that played the trombone, I was no longer the only one, so he didn't have to play with us anymore. And I only ended up playing one more semester before I decided to quit because something felt missing. It wasn't as fun anymore. And flash forward to just a few years ago, I was doing a road trip through the South, and I stopped in New Orleans, and I was so excited to finally see New Orleans. And as I was walking around the city, it was so cool to me because I kept thinking, this is the city that my dad lived in when he was my age. And if you haven't been to New Orleans, you gotta see it. It's such an amazing city. And the last thing I did there was I went to a club called Preservation Hall. It's a pretty famous club in New Orleans, and it's kind of this hole-in-the-wall, really old place where these older gentlemen play Dixieland jazz. And I was seated right in front of the trombone player. And as they're playing, I'm just having the time of my life because this trombone player is so good, and he's just hitting every note perfectly. And then right before they ended, a guy from the back of the room comes up and hands the lead man a $5 bill and asks him to play What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. And as they start to play, and it's slow and it's smooth and it's beautiful, I'm listening to the trombone player in front of me, and I just become overwhelmed with emotion. Because it was like in that moment, I was transformed back into being fourth grade Ryan. And I was so appreciative that I got to have those special moments playing music with my dad. And when I got back from New Orleans, I went up to my parents' attic, and it turns out that they had kept my trombone this whole time. And I open up the case, and I smell the brass for the first time in years. It's such a sweet smell. And I put the horn and the slide together, and you just hear all the familiar sounds. And I start playing, and immediately I'm reminded of how terrible I was. But this time, I don't care, because I'm not listening to myself play. I'm listening to the memory of playing with my dad. Thank you.